Welcome to the Spies and Spymaster Happy Hour, brought to you by the International Spy Museum. My name is Hannah Saloyo. I am the Adult Education Experience Developer of the International Spy Museum, and tonight we are going to go back in time to Elizabethan England with Dr. Alexis Albion, Curator of the International Spy Museum. Hey, Alexis, who is going to be talking about Queen Elizabeth I Spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham. But before we get going, we actually have a special guest tonight. We love special guests. Let's see, who do we have? It says we have Queen Elizabeth I. Is that correct? Good evening, Your Majesty.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for joining us.
I am surprised to be disturbed at so late an hour. I trust there is good reason to keep me from my bedchamber.
We're having a happy hour.
And what, pray, is a happy hour?
It's like a time when friends get together and have drinks and get to chat and hang out together.
An entertainment, a welcome distraction from this noxious contagion that abounds across all lands. Oh, how I do miss such entertainments offered at court by the good William Shakespeare and his players. It is, as you know, not wise for any to make visits at this time. Your good health.
Cheers. And cheers to everyone out there. So to get us in the mood, we are going to head over to Stoney's, where Reese is mixing up a Pimm's cup tonight. Very festive. So take it away, Reese.
Hey guys, how y'all doing today? So like you said, we're going to be doing a Pimm's cup. So we're going to start with Pimm's #1 cup. It is a gin liqueur. I have actually, let me backtrack. You're going to put ice into your highball glass. This actually comes with a lot of garnish. So I'm going to put 1 cucumber slice and some minced figs inside first, along with my ice. Then I'm going to add 2 ounces of Pimm's #1 cup, which is a gin liqueur. I'm going to add 3 ounces of ginger beer. You can also use Sprite or ginger ale. I like a little spice to mine, which is why I choose ginger beer. And you're just going to shake it up. And we're going to pour it away.
Oh.
And we have a lot of garnish. We're going to do some strawberries, some oranges, and some lemon.
Definitely have some exotic fruits.
I know, it's very good. A nice summery drink for this nice weather today, guys. Cheers.
Well, cheers, Reese. And for anyone who's in the DC Logan Circle area, Stoney's on P Street is open for pickup orders. So if you don't feel like cooking, they got you tonight. And with that, thank you, Your Majesty. I think we're going to come back to you later, so take a rest for us.
Your good health.
So now over to Alexis. Dr. Alexis Albion is the Curator of Special Exhibits of the International Spy Museum. She has a PhD in history and was the lead curator for the museum's move to our new location, overseeing all of our permanent exhibits. So she knows pretty much everything that's in the museum. She's developed a number of these exhibits herself, including our exhibit on Spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham. So Alexis, I'm going to pass the controls over to you so you can share your presentation with everyone.
Okay.
And I'll see you.
Today, we are going to be talking about this gentleman, Sir Francis Walsingham, Spymaster for Queen Elizabeth. I hope everybody has their cocktail ready, including Sir Francis. There you go. As you can tell, I've been spending a lot of time in quarantine, and it's amazing what you can learn about PowerPoint. So excuse my little whimsy there. I wanted to bring everybody back in time. First of all, here we go, back in time. It's 1559, and it is the coronation day of Queen Elizabeth I. Here she is. It's her coronation portrait. It's beautiful. Here she is in her golden gowns. She is about to embark on a long and glorious reign. It's one of the longest in English history. We now look back on the Elizabethan era as a time of exploration, of arts and literature, and of peace and prosperity. But in 1559, nobody would have expected that. In fact, you would not have expected Queen Elizabeth to last even maybe a few years, because she was inheriting a throne that was very, very precarious at a time when England was going through the English Reformation. It was a time of rivalry, religious rivalry between Protestants and Catholics. It was a time of near civil war in Europe between Catholic countries and Protestant countries, and Elizabeth was in a very dangerous position. It was all pretty much the fault of her father. This man, Henry VIII, you've probably heard of him because of his 6 wives. But he did a lot more than that. His first 3 wives were the ones who gave him his 3 children, and that's what he was really focused on, a male heir. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, she was the Spanish princess, very Catholic. She gave him a daughter but no son, so he divorced her. In so doing, he split with the Roman Catholic Church. It was the Brexit of its day, Brexit with Bibles, a fissure that would have repercussions for decades afterwards. Henry went on to marry again, Anne Boleyn, that's Elizabeth's mother. He tired of her after a while, and she didn't give him a male heir, so he chopped off her head. He married again. His 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, gave him the son that he wanted, Edward. When Henry died, his son Edward became king. He brought the country into Protestantism. He was the first Protestant English monarch. He was a young boy. He did not last very long when he died. His stepsister Mary became queen, Catholic. You probably have heard of Bloody Mary. That's her. She tried to reverse the entire English Reformation and bring England back into the Roman Catholic Church. She did not succeed, but she did try to she succeeded in burning quite a few hundred people at the stake. But she died herself without leaving any male heir, leaving us with Elizabeth to take the throne. So Elizabeth has been brought up Protestant. People know she's going to bring England back into Protestantism, but there are English Catholics at home and abroad who are not happy about that at all. And they have their eye fixed on somebody else, a legitimate rival to the throne of England, and that's this woman, Mary Stuart, Mary, Queen of Scots. She is actually descended from Henry VIII. She's Henry's grand niece, which makes her Elizabeth's 2nd cousin. And she has, as I said, a legitimate claim, stake to the throne of England. In fact, for many Catholics, she has a more legitimate claim because they don't recognize Elizabeth's birthright at all. They recognize Henry's first wife. They don't recognize Anne Boleyn, who, after all, was beheaded as a traitor. And they see Mary as the true Queen of England. And the 2 of them are rivals. There you go. You can see I've been spending a lot of time with PowerPoint. Now, what's Elizabeth supposed to do? Well, all her advisors are saying she should get married. Get married, have a son, have an heir to the throne, cut off Mary's claim to the throne. But Elizabeth decides to do something else. Here she is in her rainbow portrait, a very famous portrait. And I want you to look at her clothing here. Here's a close-up. You can see embroidered on her clothing are these ears and eyes. It's Elizabeth sending a symbol that she hears and sees everything. Elizabeth is going to protect herself by using intelligence. And in fact, it's her intelligence agency that are her ears and eyes. Here's Elizabeth on the right-hand side. She's flanked by probably the 2 most important men in her life. On the left of her is Lord Burleigh. He was her chief minister. He basically was running things day to day, and it wasn't long that he realized that intelligence operations were going to be a full-time job. So he brings in the gentleman on Elizabeth's right, also in the portrait, Sir Francis Walsingham. Sir Francis is the principal foreign secretary, or principal secretary of state, I think is his official title. He has responsibilities that are both foreign and domestic. He's kind of like the Secretary of State and the DNI, the head of intelligence, all wrapped into one. It's a very powerful position, but it depends entirely on his relationship with the Queen. He has daily access to the Queen. And that's a very interesting relationship that they have, because Sir Francis and Elizabeth are very opposite characters. Elizabeth is very intelligent, of course, but she's also whimsical, very sensitive at times. Now, Sir Francis is a rather sober type, a very serious type. I think you can see in this portrait he's wearing what he always wore black with the white ruff and the scholar's cap. In fact, Elizabeth sometimes made fun of him for being so sober and because of his very solemn dress. And another thing that she found a bit irritating about him was that Walsingham did not shy away from speaking truth to power. He was very direct with the Queen, and sometimes she did not like this, perhaps when he was bringing her news that she didn't want to hear. And there's a well-known incident when she actually threw her shoe at Sir Francis because she was so annoyed at him. Well, Sir Francis inherits what type of intelligence organization when he becomes Elizabeth's spy chief? Well, pretty much nothing at all. There was intelligence, there were spies certainly before Walsingham, but it was a pretty amateur affair. Basically, it was merchants going to Europe and being told, see what you can find out, you know, amongst the king's enemies. Mostly there were agents in France, nowhere else. Well, Walsingham changes all of that. He sets up an organized and integrated intelligence establishment, the first certainly in English history. And he has a network of spies across Europe and even beyond. He's got people in Scotland, he's got them in France, in Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, even as far afield as Turkey and North Africa. It's an extraordinary network that he has of people placed all over the place, sending him information about what different rulers, what their intentions are toward England. And these agents that he has are not amateurs. He is recruiting people, often from Cambridge University, who have skills. They have languages, they know the right people, they can get access to the right information. And he does not shy away at all from recruiting people who aren't very nice, perhaps maybe people in prison, certainly Catholics. Walsingham himself was a zealously Protestant and anti-Catholic. I don't think it's too far to say that he hated Catholics, and yet he had no problem at all with recruiting Catholic exiles, for example, English Catholic exiles in Europe, if they were in the right positions to help him. Apart from human intelligence collection, he also set up a SIGINT section of his intelligence organization, signals intelligence. He had cryptographers who he trained, code breakers, code makers, who were focused on intercepting communications. He even had people who were trained specifically in how to raise those seals on letters and put them back again so that no one would notice that letters had been read. He used covert action, specifically propaganda, deception operations. And this entire setup was very much dependent on him, Sir Francis himself. He was at the head, he had his fingers in everything. There was no intelligence headquarters at that time. In fact, Sir Francis ran everything out of his own home in Aldwych. His house doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but if you look at that address where he lived, today it's an office building, and I think it's very nice that it's called Walsingham House. So there were plots, conspiracies of all kinds against Elizabeth, but they all basically had the same narrative, which was get rid of Elizabeth somehow and put Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne of England and return England to the Roman Catholic faith. Sir Walsingham broke up a number of these plots, found the conspirators, but one thing he wasn't able to do was to connect the conspiracies with Mary, Queen of Scots. He wasn't able to show that she was a co-conspirator, which is what he wanted to do, because as long as Mary was free, as long as Mary was alive, Elizabeth's life was in danger. Well, all that changed with the Babington plot, 1586. Here's Anthony Babington. He was a loyal follower of Mary, Queen of Scots, a Catholic, and he came up with his own plot, again, to get rid of Elizabeth, in fact, assassinate her, and put Mary on the throne of England. Now, Mary was at this time actually in England. She was under house arrest, under the protection, I guess, of Elizabeth. That's a whole story in and of itself, but Mary actually abdicated the throne of Scotland to her son. She had her own difficulties in Scotland between Protestant nobles and Catholics. So she is holed up in a castle about 150 miles outside of London. And she has to be very careful in her correspondence with all these followers and people who are trying to conspire with her. She uses a cipher to correspond with them. Here it is. This is the cipher she used, the Babington cipher. She actually gave it to Babington and said, let's write using this. It's a pretty common substitution cipher. It was, these kind of ciphers were used at the time. Basically, you've got symbols being used for letters of the alphabet and also for common phrases, names, places, and so on. So here, for example, is the symbol for the Queen of England. And here's the one for Francis Walsingham over here. The idea was that she would encipher these letters, put them actually in a beer barrel, the bung of a beer barrel, and that's the way a courier would pick them up and bring them to the conspirators and bring letters back. So this was the way they communicated. Only one problem: Walsingham knew all about it. In fact, the courier was a double agent who he had turned. Even the brewer who brought the beer barrels to her castle, he was also in Walsingham's pay. He knew all about this, and he was waiting to see the plot unfold. Well, all that came to fruition with this letter here, written by Babington. You can see his signature there at the bottom. It was a long letter that Babington wrote to Mary on July 6th, 1586. And in it, he outlines his plan. And this is what he says: for the dispatch of the usurper, there be 6 noble gentlemen, all my private friends, who will undertake that tragical execution. It's very clear what this means. The letter is brought to Walsingham's cryptographer. His name was Thomas Phillips. He was the best code breaker he had. He decrypted it, and when he read this, he must have rubbed his hands together with glee, because for the dispatch of the usurper is crystal clear. Dispatch, assassination, the usurper, that is Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth. This is the plot to assassinate Elizabeth and put Mary on the throne. Now Walsingham and Phillips just have to wait for Mary's answer. And here it comes about 10 days later. Now, Mary is cautious. She doesn't say that she approves of the plan outright, but she doesn't disapprove of it either. She asks some questions. Well, how many arms, how many men, how much money do you have? She also gives some advice, and she says, you know, probably better to make sure that the Queen is taken care of before you save me. Now, when Phillips decrypts this, he thought he had struck gold. He thought, this is it. This is what we need to arrest Mary and get rid of her forever. We know that because he puts the decrypted letter in an envelope which he brings to Walsingham, and on the envelope he draws a little doodle of a gallows. He thought, this is the nail in the coffin. He brings it to Walsingham. Walsingham sees it and he says, well, I'd like a little bit more. So Phillips goes back and he writes this postscript right here. He forges Mary's handwriting, and he writes this postscript in the cipher that they've been using. And in it, she says, this is Mary that's saying this, "I would be glad to know the names and qualities of the 6 gentlemen which are to accomplish the designment, for that it may be I shall be upon knowledge of the parties to give you some further advice." Walsingham is being very clever here. He's getting the names of the co-conspirators, and he's making it quite clear that Mary knows exactly what is going on. It is the nail in the coffin. Babington and his co-conspirators are rounded up, arrested, put on trial, sentenced to death. Elizabeth herself says, "I'd like a particularly nasty death for these men." They are hung, drawn, and quartered. It's not very nice at all. And Mary is arrested and put on trial. The trial is quite a famous episode in English history. You can read the transcript of the whole thing if you like. It's very dramatic. And there's a wonderful moment in the trial, which I want to tell you about. There's no jury of peers at the time. That didn't happen. There were a number of counselors, they called them, who acted as judges, heard all the evidence and so on. Walsingham was one of them. At one point in the trial, Mary addresses Walsingham directly, and she says, "I hear you are an honest man, but I pray you say in the word of an honest man whether you have been so unto me. Have you been honest with me?" And Walsingham answers. He says, "Well, as a private individual, I'm a very honest man. As a professional, as a civil servant, I have done what I need to do." And then he says, "I protest before God that as a man careful of his mistress' safety, I have been curious." I looked up the word curious and what it means in 16th century English, and it basically means fastidious, diligent. What Walsingham here is saying is, in protecting the Queen, doing my duty, I have been tireless. I have been diligent. I have done my job well. Mary is convicted of treason, and the sentence for that is death. All that is needed is to sign the death warrant. This is the death warrant. Parliament approves it. Elizabeth dithers and dithers and dithers for over 4 months. She does not want to send her cousin to the executioner's block. She has a real problem with this. She tries to find every excuse, some other way that they can get rid of Mary, somebody else who can take responsibility. But in the end, she does sign, and Mary is beheaded. It's, again, a very dramatic moment. It's been shown in paintings, in popular culture. Mary wears a red dress, the sign of the martyr. She goes to her death thinking she is a martyr to her Catholic faith. Interestingly, Walsingham chose the executioner himself. So I don't have much time to talk about anything else, but the defeat of the Armada is another real feather in Walsingham's hat. The death of Mary, Queen of Scots, angers King Philip of Spain so much that he is going to invade England. He wants to have his armada ready for the invasion. Within a day of King Philip having the plans for the invasion, Walsingham has them too. It gives him enough time to plan all kinds of arrangements such that 18 months later, England is able to defeat Spain's fleet. It's quite an incredible moment and still seen as one of England's greatest victories. Francis serves for 17 years as Queen Elizabeth's Spymaster. He dies on the job and is buried in St. Paul's Cathedral. And I just want to end it with his epitaph. We don't have Sir Francis Walsingham's tomb or his anymore. It burned actually in the Fire of London, but we do know where this epitaph was. It was probably the first ever epitaph for a Spymaster, and it was, "In foreign countries their intents he knew, such was his zeal to do his country good, when dangers would by enemies ensue, as well as they themselves, he understood." Elizabeth's Spymaster understood everything that was going on. So I did want to just go back to the great defeat of the Spanish Armada. If And when you go to the Spy Museum, you'll be able to see our Walsingham exhibit. And in there we have a number of wonderful dialogues between Walsingham and Queen Elizabeth, little films. And there's one that we wanted to show you today. It's a conversation between Queen Elizabeth and Walsingham about the Spanish Armada. And we're going to show that to you now. And I think you'll get a great idea about how instrumental Walsingham was in that victory.
There is treachery afoot in Spain.
From my brother-in-law, King Philip, I would surmise. Though he was my former suitor, I cannot find it in me to fear a man who took 10 years for the learning of his alphabet.
You must. He has vowed to avenge the execution of your royal cousin Mary. As we speak, he prepares his Armada, a mighty fleet with which to invade your realm and return England to the Catholic fold.
You know this to be certain?
I do, my lady. My good agent Standen in Italy has, through his friendships, obtained this intelligence. I have in my hands a copy of the order of battle drawn up by the Spanish Grand Admiral.
Most impressive, Sir Francis. Yet England is ill prepared to face this usurper. How shall we marshal our defences?
We need time to fortify. With respect, I suggest a most covert action that will afford us the necessary interval.
Pray do tell us.
Send your most devoted defender, Sir Francis Drake, to strike the Spanish ships still docked at port.
A surprise blow! A fine intrigue! See to it that our friend Drake does singe the beard of King Philip.
My agents in Spain are already hard at work, confusing your enemies with false reports of errant tides and impassable harbours on our shores. And more, our financiers in London can convince his foreign lenders to staunch his flow of silver.
We shall likely hear his howls even leagues afar.
I have as well other stratagems.
Your guile knows no bounds, Sir Francis. You are a cunning devil. Indeed, we would have your head, were it not so nobly employed in defending our own.
Most gracious, Your Majesty.
It was only half a compliment, but take it as you will. We are pleased.
Your loyal servant.
I hope you all got a good sense of what we have on offer at the museum. And now, actually, I did want to welcome back our special guest, Queen Elizabeth I. Are you there, Your Majesty?
Indeed, that was a most satisfying and marvellous victory, don't you think? I'll definitely speak to that.
Oh, me too, absolutely. Now, I did want to, wondering if you are actually under quarantine yourself. I know this may not be the first time you've experienced something like this.
Indeed, it isn't. You'll remember the dreaded plague of 1563. Truly, an annus horribilis. The city of London was overwrought with sickness and death. And now the pestilence rages again.
So are you social distancing?
Well, yes, my court hath moved a distance to Windsor Castle. And socially, we have decreed that all houses with infected individuals should have their doors and windows boarded up. No person within is to make contact with persons without for 40 days.
Ah, it's a stay-at-home order. We've got one of those too.
I trust you are all praying and fasting to hasten the swift demise of the plague in your realms.
Well, I think we're all sort of overeating, actually, and we are watching a lot of Netflix. But anyway, thing is, I actually did want to ask you about your Spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham.
Sir Francis, but I thought you said this was to be a happy hour. That man brings me nothing but bad news and grim reports.
But he is a good Spymaster, yes?
He has served me well, that I will say, though he certainly has tested my good favour.
Ah, you mean with respect to your cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots?
Indeed, my cousin. It's been years now since she met her fate. An anointed queen. I still cannot find it in me to forgive the cunning of the man.
Do you mean Anthony Babington, the conspirator who actually wanted to put Mary on your throne?
Nay, not that scurrilous dog Babington, whose fate well befitted his villainy. Such treason deserves no forgiveness. I speak of Sir Francis, my loyal spymaster. It is he who secured proof of Mary's treachery and persuaded me to spill the blood of a queen. E'en now 'tis like a poison that gnaws at my own heart. Perhaps God has sent this pestilence as punishment.
But Mary did conspire against you. I mean, we were just looking at some of the evidence that Sir Francis obtained, and it's very clear.
Aye, 'tis clear that my diligent spymaster did tease out the vile message of the clever code employed by my unfaithful cousin. But by my faith, I do wonder sometimes if he did tease out rather too much.
But you did sign her death warrant.
I did. And thus sent a queen to the executioner's block. As my father before me sent my mother.
Yes, Anne Boleyn. I can imagine that it must have been very difficult for you to make the decision to send Mary to the same fate.
I would have taken more pleasure in any other thing under the sun. It earned me the rebuke of the whole world and the vengeful retribution of the Catholic princes. And yet had I shown mercy, men would say the weakness of my sex did cloud my judgment, and would have left me exposed to the Catholic viper that would see me dethroned. Nay, I could not choose to ignore these perils or endanger the fate of England.
Bravo, Your Majesty.
A covert plot to kill her would have been more to my liking. I did ask Sir Francis to make such arrangements.
What was that? Tell us about that.
Enough. I have said more than I should. Pray, keep your counsel. These dark thoughts vex me. So much for your happy hour. I must rest my head anon. The business of the morrow is fast upon us. I drink to your good health, and to the good health of all my subjects in all lands wherever ye may be. May God bless you.
And you, Your Majesty, I can drink to that. Thank you very much. We will leave you to your rest now. Thank you so much for joining us. My goodness. Can you believe that?
That was amazing. We had the Queen.
I know.
So exciting.
Not every happy hour you can say you've been visited by Queen Elizabeth I.
I mean, it's pretty cool. And actually, we have another guest.
Ah, yes, we do. We have another special guest now. In fact, it is Airlie Scott, aka Queen Elizabeth I. Airlie, thank you so much for joining us today. Airlie is actually our Queen Elizabeth that you saw in that skit there. And when you come to the museum, you'll be able to see a lot more of her. Thank you, Airlie, so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
But while you guys were talking, actually questions started to roll in. So I'm going to start asking you guys questions from our audience so we have time. Let's start with one though, Alexis, about Sir Francis. And do you consider him the father of British espionage?
Oh, yes, I think he is definitely considered the father of British English espionage intelligence. And that's the interesting thing. It actually, goes beyond just, so espionage we would call, human intelligence collection. And I think what's really interesting about that, there certainly had been spies before, there had been espionage before, but as I said, it's the integration and the organization that Sir Francis is really so impressive with. He sets up this, it is truly an organization, and he's got his spies, he's got recruitment, and he's also got this whole cryptography section as well, which is really impressive. And I did also mention some covert action. So definitely, I think we could consider him the very first M.
And you actually brought up cryptography, which was, I think everyone liked seeing the letters and the coding. Someone has a great question that I actually don't know the answer to. How sophisticated can a pen and paper code be, other than a simple cipher code?
Right. Well, I can't say I am an expert in cryptography, but the ones I was showing you were substitution codes. And I can show you everything there. But apart from there being, as you saw, there were symbols for the names of individuals, for places, for other maybe things that were commonly used, certainly for letters. They also were able to have additional symbols to complicate it very much. Certainly they knew that there were code breakers, people who were breaking the codes. So they did sort of try to make the codes more complicated. For example, there would be symbols in there which would say, for example, I have to say, like, if you're using this symbol, then now it'll be only every second word or every fifth word now. I mean, they were able to put other symbols in there to make it a bit more complicated than just simple substitution. So I think it was growing in sophistication. And, I mean, let's not be too negative about simple paper and pen codes. I mean, there have been paper and pen codes that have been used for centuries and centuries. And it's really, if you don't have the key, then they can be really quite difficult to break if you don't have computers and things like that, which of course they didn't in those days. And I mean, it is wonderful that we have all these records. I mean, these are all from the British Archives. The British Archives actually has some wonderful stuff online if you want to see more about this, but that we have all these letters. Interestingly, we don't know very much about Sir Francis's, the early part of his life, really. His personal papers do not exist anymore. We don't know where they are. But once he obviously starts working for Elizabeth, there's quite a lot of paper there in the archives. We have letters going back and forth. I mean, this is the reason why we know so much about him and about his spies, is because we actually have correspondence. Now, one of the other things I have to mention is that, as I said, for Francis, this was really quite a personal sort of organization that he had. He was running the whole thing. And so interestingly, apparently, so we know here, he had a book, a big book, I assume, which he kept in his home, where he ran this entire organization from, called the Book of Secrets, something along those lines, in which he recorded all this information, the names of agents, what their aliases were, where they were, what particular ciphers they were using, how much they were paid. Unfortunately, that book does not exist anymore, not that we know of, but how amazing, that he kept this all himself. So there is quite a lot of information out there. Unfortunately, I wish there could be more.
Well, we're going to have a ton of questions coming about Walsingham, but we actually have a ton coming in from our queen, because everyone's seen our thing now. So Airlie, first question, have you played the Queen in other forums? And then, because you mentioned him, do you have a favorite Shakespeare play?
Oh, there we go. So no, this job that I did for the Spy Museum 2 years ago, we filmed it in June on a very, very hot day in London, near Vauxhall, in the studio there. So the white that I had, makeup I had on, was quickly sweating off. I remember I kept having to have it put back on. That was actually my first time playing Elizabeth, but as you can imagine, it's kind of a dream role for a British actress, particularly a British actress with a bit of red hair. So I really appreciated being asked to play the role and to research her and to step into her shoes. And as far as Shakespeare plays go, I love, what do I love? I love As You Like It. I love, what else? Merchant of Venice. Yeah, there's many. Measure for Measure, a lovely role, Isabella. Yeah, there's a number that I like. Yeah.
And then I've actually had a couple people ask this, hang on, it just came in. How do you get into the mind of someone who lived so long ago?
Oh, how to get into the mind? Well, my process, everyone's process might be a little bit different, but I would watch some documentaries to sort of understand the historical context. And really that's just for the kind of social and historical cues, but people are people, whatever age you're in. So really it's about connecting to the feelings and the decision making that that individual has to make. I mean, in the case of a monarch, it's a much bigger decision that she has to take. But she, as Alexis brought out in her fantastic presentation, which I really enjoyed, she found it really difficult to make that decision to behead her cousin. And we think, you know, because she's a queen, it's off with her head. But no, it was a really, really difficult decision because it's murdering another queen. So yes, and a cousin, so family as well. So I found it fascinating to try and find the truth, as well as, you know, this sense of dignity and authority that she carries as well.
So speaking of Walsingham, as I think we find him fascinating, is how did he get his job working for our queen? Or for Queen, not our queen, Queen Elizabeth I. Alexis, do we know how he ended up? Yeah.
Oh, well, during the presentation, I don't know, there was one slide that had a picture with Elizabeth in the middle and two men on either side. Walsingham on one side and the other side was Robert Cecil, Lord Burleigh. It was Burleigh, it was he that actually brought Sir Francis in. They were acquainted. So I didn't have really time to go into Sir Francis's background a little bit, but he had spent most of his 20s, I guess, basically bumming around Europe, and he studied law, and he was in exile for a certain amount of time during Queen Mary's, Bloody Mary's reign, because he was a zealous Protestant. But when he came back to England when Elizabeth became queen, you know, and he became an MP. He was a member of Parliament, and so that's when his sort of political career began. And so he is, you know, in these political circles. He was a notable family. You know, it was a small world in those days. And he became quite well known because he was known to be very, very competent. And Cecil, Lord Burleigh, actually took an interest in him and brought him on. Before he became Spymaster, he had a number of other roles, including actually he was England's ambassador in Paris. And he started working with Burleigh on intelligence matters. The two worked together. And as I said, eventually Burleigh sort of said, look, somebody needs to run this. It's getting to be a bigger job, and put Sir Francis in charge.
So I'm going to combo some of these questions because I see some that kind of go together. So Walsingham, let's see, how did he keep his spies loyal, and what would he pay any of them?
So yeah, they were paid. So I know that at a certain point, Sir Francis was being given, I think it was £2,000 a year, which I'm not sure what that would be exactly in 21st century money.
It's a lot of money.
He had a budget, you know, he had a budget. And we do actually know how much some of them were paid because of this correspondence. I know that one particularly good one that he had, who was particularly helpful with the Spanish Armada. You know, as I said, Sir Francis was meeting daily with the Queen. So he was literally saying, I've heard from so-and-so, you know, about this. And there was one particularly very able agent that he had, who basically, he's the one who was able to obtain the invasion plans for the Spanish Armada. And Elizabeth sort of says, you know, well done, give him £200. So she really knew what was going on. So we do know that they were certainly being paid, yes. And we know something about his budget. How did he keep them loyal? You know, I think apart from being paid, I think a lot of them were probably working because they they believed in the mission. Again, Walsingham himself was zealously Protestant, and he was recruiting people, a lot of them from Cambridge University. But he also believed in blackmail. A number of the people who he turned made into double agents. He had something on him, and he basically said, if you don't want to be thrown into the tower, come and work for me. So he was certainly not beyond using all those methods.
Airlie, what do you think Queen Elizabeth, or yours, favorite stay-at-home activity was during the plague?
Oh,
that's a great question.
Well, keeping herself safe.
Trying to keep it relevant to today a little bit somehow.
Playing chess, maybe. Doing big puzzles. Isn't that what we're all doing? No. I don't. It wouldn't be something. They didn't have Netflix, so I know we're all watching a lot of Netflix and Amazon Prime. But yes, I think there would have been music making, tapestry, sewing, that kind of thing. And she would have had a lot of business to deal with. I mean, she was really worried about the City of London. She moved out to Windsor Castle, and so I think she was quite a hands-on queen, as far as I understand it.
Yeah. I just want to say that sort of stay-at-home order thing that we made fun of in the dialogue is actually exactly what Elizabeth did order during that plague. She actually did make those orders. So some things never change, right?
Yes.
So people have a lot of questions actually about Mary, Queen of Scots. So they want to know why she was executed with an axe instead of a sword, and if she was ever considered a martyr by the Catholic Church.
Why was she considered a martyr by the Catholic Church?
Was she ever considered a martyr?
Okay, so as to why she was rather than a sword, I'm sorry, I don't know exactly the ins and outs of.
I know Anne Boleyn was executed with the sword. That was
Mary Queen.
Amanda's on the back end. She's going to tell me if that's true or not. But I'm like, no,
I do not. I am not. I think it's an axe. I'm sorry. I would. My guess would be that Anne Boleyn was executed with an axe. I mean, since we're talking about axes and so on, I mean, one of the, her execution is a very dramatic affair. It's really something that is completely understandable why this has been depicted in films and things so much, and it is almost unbelievable what went on that day. But the one thing is that one swing of the axe was not enough. The first swing actually only grazed her neck, and in fact she sort of says, come on, what's going on? and it takes, I think, 2 more swings from the axe to actually chop off her head. Yes, it's a wonderful story. And then the execution actually holds up her head. And one of the surprising things is when he does so, her hair comes right off because she's been wearing a wig. And underneath, she's got this gray hair. One of the things about Mary is she was quite well known for being a great, great beauty. And when she walks out to her execution, which is of course a public execution, people are quite amazed at how unattractive she looks. That she actually looks a bit chubby apparently, and much older than they thought. And
we
so
got confirmation. It is a sword. It is a sword. I thought that was true. I wasn't 100%.
Don't know
it was
everything.
One of the things Henry VIII did for her.
Really? Oh, I don't know. Maybe she didn't request it. I'm sure I do not know the answer to that. But I would encourage anybody who's really interested in Mary's Queen of Scots to read about her execution if you're into that. It's really quite something. And it is very dramatic. And one other interesting thing, they, going back to the martyr part, they actually very quickly collected up her body and her clothes and everything because they didn't want anything to be left that could actually be taken as, a memento or something for Mary that people could have. Oh, here's the martyr's dress. So they gathered it all up. They're going to burn it, and they did burn it. And whoever it was who gathered it all up picks up her skirt and it starts moving underneath. And it's because her little lapdog had actually come with her to the executioner's block and was hiding under her dress. I know. So many little details and interesting drama that is connected with it. Yeah.
But she
Never seen
probably
that.
wanted the drama to be sort of exaggerated as well, didn't she, in her death? That's what I read and understood, was that there was this ongoing sort of competition between them, wasn't there? And even in death, Mary Queen of Scots was going to make sure she did it her way, in a way.
Definitely played up the moment, and in fact she comes out wearing this sort of black cloak over her dress and then takes it off dramatically, and underneath she has this bright red, apparently I think quite low cut dress on. Red would have been clear to everybody as the color of a martyr. So she definitely plays up the drama, yes.
Let's see. People want to know with Walsingham, because I know he is our Spymaster tonight, did his spy agency survive after him as the institution, or was his network so personal it kind of fell apart?
It's a good question. It does kind of fall apart. Yes, actually it does afterwards, because he had such a personal grip on things. Yes, unfortunately, yeah, I mean, he dies in office, basically. So he doesn't set up anything for afterwards, and it is a bit of a mess for quite a long time after that, yeah.
Let's see. So this one's a little complicated, but is there any truth in the theory that some of the plots made against Elizabeth by Mary were actually by Mary's enemies to get people to believe it was Mary? That is a roundabout question. I just thought it was interesting.
Not that I'm aware of, I have to say. You know, not that I am aware of. Certainly the ones that I know of, sort of the most famous ones, they were very clearly being backed by Spain, being paid for by Spain. Even the papacy actually was providing some funding for these plots, and the French. No, not that I am aware of, no.
But one last question before we end tonight is, what do we know about the individuals who were in Walsingham's spy network? Were they English? Could they have been other nationalities? I know you mentioned the book he keeps with everyone's name, but we don't know if his papers did survive. I didn't hear you that last time.
No. We don't have the book, but we have correspondence. So yes. No, he had. We do know about some of his agents. Some of them were not English. There were all types of people, all types. And I said he was particularly good at. There were all these English Catholic exiles, people who had fled England when Elizabeth becomes the Queen, and he made good use of actually recruiting them because they were all over Europe in different countries. No, he had a whole lot of different people that he recruited. Again, Cambridge University was a favorite recruiting ground. That's so interesting because, of course, Cambridge has a reputation up until the 20th century
immediately
for being a good place to recruit spies. So it begins a long time ago. We do know something about them from their letters, and he had some really exceptional ones whose names we do know and learn a little bit more about. I don't know how much more to say about that.
No, you're good. Well, I just want to thank everyone who came tonight, and Airlie, thank you so much. I know it is very late where you are across the pond. I'm going to say it because I want to. And I just want to thank everyone. Yeah, you're already in your bedtime clothes. So you could just sneak on in. So thank you to Stonies and to Reese again for being our wonderful bar partner on these programs. We're actually going to start expanding to a couple other bars for some specialty programs, but don't worry, we'll be back to Reese eventually. With that, have a good evening, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers. Stay safe.
Stay safe.